Before we begin, thank you all for your feedback and support for episode 1. A lot of you loved it, but there were plenty of suggestions to make the next episodes better, which I will be implementing. Second, I know there's been some names I mispronounced, like Alisa and Lunacia. And I know this is annoying since I also get peeved by this. But these names, you'll just have to bear with me as I figure this stuff out over time. Lastly, if you haven't seen episode 1, please check it out. It provides the foundation for everything moving forward, and I want to avoid redefining terms. Before we get started, let's recap. You are the Griffin Commander. The gender is ambiguous, but for this summary, I will be referring to him as male. With him is Kalina, who is his trusted logistics officer. In the last episode, she commanded T-Dolph on a rescue mission to save the commander, who was held in an enemy base. As of now, they are calling this enemy the White Faction. As for the Griffin T-Dolls, our main players of this group are Emperor A1, M16A1, Sophomod 2, STAR-15, and RO-635. Right now, Emperor A1 and AR-15 are not with Griffin, and M16A1 has been warped into a songless T-Doll, so that only leaves Sophomod and RO with Griffin. Next, we have Squad 404. Even though they are just a mercenary group and unaffiliated, they are often hired by Griffin and Angelia. The members here are UMP-45, UMP-9, HK-416, and G-11. Next, we have our new players on this field, which is Team Defy. Team Defy belongs to StateSec, though they have gone rogue. The commander of this team is Angelia, former Griffin commander, former StateSec agent, and now a traitor. The T-Dolls in this group are Emperor A1, who's the current squad leader, STAR-15, AK-12, who is the usual squad leader, and AN-94, who is an AK-12 Glazer. Lastly, we have Kruger, who is currently in jail due to being framed for illegal activity. We have Hellion, who is still in Griffin, but is more or less keeping her head down. We have Persica, who is continuing to support both the commander and Angelia. We have Javier, who is funding Griffin, while staying under the radar from StateSec. And finally, we have Zelensky, the director of StateSec, and is currently the guy who, metaphorically, has a noose around the commander's neck. Angelia has stolen sensitive information and not reported back to StateSec, and is now deemed a terrorist. Due to the commander working with Angelia to hide this information, he has been deemed an accomplice. And with everything else charged to Griffin, StateSec could easily execute them all. But thanks to the commander's skills and accomplishments, Director Zelensky decided he'd be much better off hiring the commander and have him work off those charges. His new mission is to find and capture Angelia. Three months after the first meeting with Zelensky, the commander and Kalina have not made much progress since even though they've been put on this assignment, they've been ordered to not leave the base. Furthermore, Griffin's vehicles were confiscated. While this gave them time to recover, they got to a point where they were just twiddling their thumbs. On the day where our story resumes, Kalina asks the commander to join her for coffee at the cafe, but before that could go further, he gets a call from Javier, and he immediately states he needs private time with the commander. While Kalina is frustrated by the timing, she holds him to taking her to the cafe and leaves afterwards. Javier then informs the commander that he managed to peel some information out of Zelensky and get a lead on Angelia. This is all considered off the record, so this would not be information that the commander should have, but this would also give him an opportunity to prove his worth to Zelensky, and perhaps afterwards, they'll be given more autonomy. With this in mind, Javier provided the commander all the information he had and some transportation. The information wasn't much to go off of. It was just a single photo of an informant, and his last known location, which was in the city of Belgrade. The commander was suspicious of Javier going out of his way to help Griffin, but nonetheless, he did see it as an opportunity. In order to reach their destination, they would need to take a civilian train called the Intercontinental Railway. Kalina set up forged IDs for everyone, as Griffin was considered a terrorist organization at this time, and the military had control of civilian areas. In order for this to work smoothly, a virus would need to be planted in the train station's network to disable the security when the forged IDs were scanned. This was an entirely new venture for the commander, but he was up for it. He took RO-635 and Sophmod as companions for this mission. And speaking of these two, Persica rebuilt RO's body, and Sophmod's body was repaired and upgraded to have even stronger combat capabilities. Also, remember that cute robo-dog that RO was temporarily using as a body? Those are called dinner gates, and Sophmod decided to keep hers, and Persica modified it to be an attachment for her frame. This now works as an enhancement to her neural cloud, and gives her stronger capabilities for her electronic warfare functions. She also named it Banana. Anyway, the plan went off without a hitch, and Commander, Sophmod, and RO boarded the train without issues. As time passes, they pass by a massive wall and machinery. These are two things: a quarantine wall and a purification tower. Simply put, the quarantine wall keeps the elites out of civilian areas, and the towers clean the air to dispel the collapsed fluid radiation. These combined make the Green Zone, which is the safe haven for civilians, though entry into Green Zone is strict, and those without legal papers would be denied. The commander felt uneasy at first, but RO asked if they will reunite the AR team after this mission. The commander looked at her in the eyes and affirmed this. And this reminded him why he was so eager to take this mission in the first place. It was the first step to returning to how things were. A few hours later, the commander decided to lay low while RO and Sophmod searched for more leads on the informant. This leads to them going to the square in the middle of Belgrade, and RO hacked into a surveillance network that would allow her to read a lot of data about the city in one go. But it would require her to go into level 2 consciousness, which basically means her body would be asleep. For context, the neural cloud of a doll has 3 consciousness levels: level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 represents surface awareness, which is the default operational state for dolls. Level 2 is the equivalent of a deep state of sleep, where the T-doll has to be inactive. The majority of neural cloud hacking happens at level 2, since this is where sensory input and body control is often stored. Level 3 is the equivalent of the subconscious, and this is where the base programming is stored. Dolls who are taken to this state often means they lost control of their body entirely, and cannot wake up without external input. Sophmod was assigned to keeping RO's body safe as she does this, and to her credit, Sophmod does manage to keep a low profile. However, her human-like qualities had drawn the attention of a human woman trying to recruit Sophmod into a political movement. But upon closer inspection, this woman realized Sophmod was a doll, which made her significantly more hostile and degrading. She demanded Sophmod to leave and stop taking up human space. When Sophmod refused, the woman went to smack Sophmod. Reflexively, Sophmod batted her hand away, but she forgot to check her strength, and the woman's arm completely bent the wrong way. This caused the woman to howl in pain and call for authorities. Luckily, RO finished her objective just in time to see the result of this, and ran off with Sophmod before things got worse. RO chastised Sophmod for her behavior, but Sophmod was a little frustrated that this woman suddenly got so hostile. RO explained that she had to take law enforcement work in the past, and several cases involved abuse and violence against dolls, sometimes even worse than that. Despite RO's efforts, a lot of these cases end up being unresolved due to the apathy of human law enforcement. Pretty much, Griffin is the only company that treats dolls very well, so RO drilled into Sophmod that the best thing they could do is to be on their best behavior. After this conversation, the two of them reviewed the footage and managed to find something very suspicious. A maid was jumped by several muggers in an alleyway. However, this maid disarmed and defeated all of them. This immediately made them realize this maid was a doll with illegal modifications. It's not standard issue for T-dolls to have advanced CQC software, and even further, making use of such software requires a body with high specs. Not even Sophmod, a CQC specialist, can calculate how much force is needed to knock humans out without killing them in the process. All of this is very expensive to put into a doll. So this led them to believe this maid could lead them closer to the informant. The two decide to spend time looking further into this. This led them to figure out that the doll has been walking around the same block for hours, and this is because she realized she was being trapped by someone else. Turns out this someone else were several members of the White faction. Sophomore realized the White faction was going to corner the maid into a trap, so RO decided to hack into their neural clouds and disable them. The maid, however, detected these signals going offline, so she made a break for it. Sophomore managed to capture her, and despite her enhancements, she is nonetheless just a civilian doll, and cannot match the sheer strength of T-dolls that are meant for warfare. RO explains to the doll that they are not here to harm her, and if the White faction wants her, it means they also want her master. RO takes the chance and states they are from Griffin, and their commander just wants to speak with her master about Angelia. The doll believes them, and Sophomore lets her go, but the doll played them for fools and she suddenly ran off. However, the doll suddenly collapses and she barrels onto the ground. After a quick scan, RO realized someone triggered her neural cloud to melt down, so she hacked into the doll to stop this. Upon completion, the doll went into a failsafe and she initiated a self-destruct sequence. RO managed to get some data out of that doll before she exploded, and part of that was the location of where the maid lived. Reaching the house, they found it already broken into. They found a man dead, and a self-destruct sequence was entered into a console, which likely caused the maid doll from before to do just that. Their informant was seemingly killed by the White faction. However, RO felt something was suspicious. She ended up licking the blood of the man, and confirmed it wasn't real. She then inspected the corpse further and learned the man is a doll disguised to look like a human. It even has a disguise feature to alter its appearance freely. Not only is this insanely expensive, but it's also illegal. This type of doll was used for entertainment purposes, but got banned after it was used to commit a political crime. With all that information, RO and Sophomore were convinced they were on the right track, but it was likely the White faction also figured out this trick since they did not dispose of the body. Checking the body, they both found an extremely small hard disk tightly gripped by the doll. While Sophomore was extremely worried this was a trap, RO hacked into it for more information. RO then found out that data from the maid was here, and the maid recognized RO. This did not add up to RO, since she realized the maid died before she could upload her data to anything. So this meant this older version of the maid's memory was already informed about Griffin, if not specifically about the commander and the AR team. Regardless, the maid entrusted RO with information regarding the master's whereabouts. The maid then ejected RO from the hard disk and initiated a meltdown once again. With this information, RO found a hidden passageway within the house, and it took them into a sewer system. Sophomore took lead to do a search, and RO sent the details to the commander and advised for reinforcements. As for the commander, he took the opportunity to fulfill that promise to Kalina and took her to a cafe. Turns out she came along to continue her supporting role. During this calm moment, he checked his personal terminal. 4 echelons of T-dolls had been transported into the city by train, and a cargo ship containing heavy weapons was just docking. The assistance that Javier said he prepared has shown up. After reading up on RO's report, it was time for the mission to go full swing. He told Kalina it was time to go, and they both left. Though, Kalina was a little annoyed that she couldn't finish her cake. When the commander established contact, RO hacked into the sewer system to disable the controls, while Commander's echelons covered the sewer exits. As the White faction was at large, they wanted to do what they could to ensure the informant wouldn't get caught. Turns out, hacking the console was the wrong move, as the White faction laid a trap to detect when the console was interacted with, so they rushed straight to RO and Sophomor's location. The two then got a transmission from someone they never met before, likely the informant, telling them they were kind of dumb for falling for such an easy trap, but informed them that they should leave now. RO refused, however, determined to not fail the commander and went deeper in. The commander got the echelons to cover RO and Softmod, while they chased down the source of their transmission. This led them to a sewer gate, and to avoid a direct confrontation, RO closed the gates. However, this prompted the White faction to unseal the dams and water began to flood in, and they also disabled the gate controls, trapping RO and Softmod. The commander ordered all T-Dolls to rout the White faction and restore controls back to the gate. When this was complete, the Griffin T-Doll stated there were no floodgate controls on their end. Panic started to settle in, but then suddenly the gate opened and the water poured out before RO and Softmod drowned. They were then approached by the informant, and his name was K. The letter K, that is. Turns out, K's servant doll knew where the gate controls were, but was unable to approach until the White faction was taken out. While that whole situation was messy, K was impressed that Griffin would go so far to find him. For exchange of the samples of the White faction remains, K would become willing to answer any questions. After getting the go-ahead from the commander, RO asked their questions. The first important question is, what is the White faction? K doesn't know, but what he did know was they're cyborgs. There were plenty of human parts underneath the machinery, though the human itself was long dead. This group initially started as a cult, as the leader claimed they had a cure for the elid. With no official cure on the market, the truly desperate flocked over to the White faction, and their leader would be seen as a savior. But of course, this was a scam. The humans are still infected, but if they could get turned into high-end killing machines, then their death is inconsequential. This was all going on a year ago, and within that time, crime rates were going down, which signaled the rise of this White faction. K then provided RO a briefcase, telling her it may be useful for the next mission. K then addressed the commander directly, stating that after seeing his work today, he now understands why so many people fear what he can accomplish. But while he is in Belgrade, he will not want K as an enemy. On the other hand, K admits he doesn't want the commander as an enemy either. With those pleasantries over, K stated it was time to talk about Angelia, and he simply stated, Angelia is not the enemy. This caused the commander's mood to sour. From his perspective, of course she wasn't the enemy. They helped save each other while stopping the military. So this was useless information for him. But what caused his mind to stir is that it's coming from an informant that is working for StateSec, and Javier's information came from StateSec. Even further, the help that Javier provided made it through all the checks. The T-Dolls were one thing, but the heavy weapons meant for long-range artillery was pretty far-fetched. With all of this combined, the commander realized this was all a setup. Once the conversation came to a close, Commander and K set up to call each other the next day, but the commander called all T-Dolls to fall back to the Griffin safe house, and to suspend all activities. He didn't even bother checking the briefcase. The next day, the commander intentionally waited until after the appointed time to call in. When K answered the call, he immediately expressed the commander was intentionally being difficult to work with. Commander then stated all of his suspicions, and he demanded to know more about Angelia's situation. K refused, and Kalina interjected to add pressure to him. This backfired though, as K suddenly stated Kalina's history. Kalina is an orphan, and she grew up homeless and drifted from place to place. Kruger found Kalina when she was still a teenager, and out of pity, he took her in and gave her a job so she could make an honest living. Thanks to her upbringing, Kalina was known to be very materialistic, and she may very well be willing to sell herself for money. K then suggested Kalina may even be willing to betray the commander for money. This point in particular infuriated Kalina, and she shut that down quickly. K noticed the genuine anger from that, and so he believed she wouldn't do that. the price would be too high for her. Likewise, Kay also made it known that he needs something worthwhile to provide such information about Angelia. Not giving this any attention, the commander stated that with everything that they did to set this up, Kay and his backers needed him and Griffin, and it was meant for something big. Until he is given more information, he will just order his T-dolls to take a vacation. Realizing how serious he was, Kay approved of the commander's negotiation skills, as he's been forced to the negotiation table himself. Kay provided the information he wanted. He says it in a cryptic way, but I'll simplify it. Angelia has been branded a traitor, but only publicly. In secret, she is still working for state security. The current mission she has been assigned is indeed in Belgrade, but the current information suggests she and her team are nowhere near close enough to handle this risky of an operation. It was at that point the commander and Kalina realized they'd been played from the very beginning. Zelensky had never intended to execute Angelia for her crimes, but fully intended to use both her and the commander under the pretense that they both be executed if they did not follow state sec's orders. Furthermore, if the commander tried to back out of this, Angelia would be killed for handling what would otherwise be an impossible task. But that wasn't everything. Kay dropped the final bit of information he obtained that suggests that M4A1 and AR-15 are also with Angelia at this very moment. This was the perfect setup. StateSec had everything important to the commander to keep him in place. Realizing this, the commander simply asked what needed to be done. The objective was simple on paper. Have all the T-dolls don disguises and act as human as possible, and sniff out any white faction members. The white faction members looked even more humans than dolls did, and they had good information that they were roaming the city, as evident when they almost ambushed one of the maids. The briefcase that Kay provided tracked the signals of these white faction members, and transferring the data to the T-dolls would allow them to be found. Once spotted, RO and Softmod can disable them without much trouble, thanks to their previous experience. The commander and Kalina were provided a new safe house with state-of-the-art equipment to get this all dealt with, and then left to their devices. Still, the two felt strong distrust about this whole situation, so they took the time to dig deeper while the mission proceeded. Kalina got in contact with an information agency that Javier recommended, and she paid a lot of Griffin's budget to get information on StateSec and Kay. While both her and the commander figured Kay was part of StateSec, this turned out to not be the case. Kay is just a subcontractor, so in a way, Kay really is just an informant, yet he was given a lot of power to hold over Griffin. Kalina concluded that Griffin as a whole was extremely low on StateSec's priority list. Furthermore, StateSec had taken official action in Belgrade. In 3 days, there is going to be a bilateral summit between the Neo-Soviet Union and the Pan-European Convention and Mutual Assistance in Reconstruction. In short, the Neo-Soviets were looking to resolve all disputes with the United Nations. That way, they can join in on the global reconstruction effort. And it seems that StateSec had called in Griffin to work as security detail, but there was a wrench in that theory. Why use Griffin in the first place? What was the point when StateSec had so much more at their disposal? And what did Angelia have to do with all of this? After a break, Kalina and Commander continued their conversation after digging up more information. The commander found out they weren't the only ones acting as security, as over 17 other groups had been announced to work as security for this meeting. Furthermore, when it came to territory, Belgrade is an independent nation and it's neutral. So, if any agreements were to be made without foul play, it would be in Belgrade. It could be easily imagined how much was riding on this meeting to go smoothly. But as a downside, since it was a neutral territory, it would mean spotting an infiltrator is much more difficult. Kalina then stated she had heard some gossip that the Neo-Soviets planned to outright join the United Nations and forge an alliance. But this was met with extreme backlash by the public. And considering what happened with the military in Operation Singularity, things started to clear up. States that have been forced to rely on independent PMCs as security detail, because they cannot rely on their own people. As the commander puts it, to some people, a world in conflict better serves their interests. To move on from that heavy topic, Kalina remembered she had to show what she found. Within his room, she set down a pile of articles and documents that Kay researched. These were all documents regarding the United Nations upholding its anti-war stance 2 years ago, which was the 10th anniversary of the end of World War III. However, all of these articles were filled of one overwhelming term, Rossartrism. And this is where I have to pause the story, because I have to explain Rossartrism. This is very likely the most important aspect of not just Ghost Frontline, but of the entire series. Back in 1992, the world was in a frenzy trying to build relic weapons. As a reaction, the United Nations Relic Agency was forged in Europe, with the sole purpose of stopping the development of relic weapons, and instead use relics for non-violent methods. Their overall goal for relic weapons was to develop an overall healthier world that all of humanity could benefit from. While the UNRA researched and developed very important projects throughout the years, what we're primarily concerned about is in the 2020s and 2030s. During this time, the director of the UNRA was Raider Albert Rossartre. During Rossartre's tenure, the largest relic site in history was also discovered beneath the Antarctic polar ice caps. Just about every expert in relic research across the world put their focus on this, including the UNRA. With a lot of effort, these researchers effectively went underground and developed an gargantuan base. Thanks to the United Nations funding of the operation, over 10,000 workers could live on this base for years if needed. Research of the site went on for over a decade. In 2030, the Belgrade Island incident happened, and Rossartre was hosting a conference about relic sites in the city of Hong Kong. This conference was interrupted by a tremor, and it was soon found that a relic site exploded. Rossartre saw firsthand the damage this incident had caused around the world. He initially believed that global powers would come together to restore the world, but that belief soon eroded. For the next 3 years, Rossartre saw the world fall into chaos. While the UNRA tried their best to fund and develop green zones, many of them outright fell apart. North Korea and South Korea went into war, and Japan had an insurrection wanting to ban immigrant refugees, which caused sheer anarchy. The United States played a huge part in these issues, as their desire to police other countries with their own military caused intense unrest. And if that wasn't enough, the United States also set off another explosion by accident when trying to tamper with collapse fluid, despite Rossartre telling them not to. The self-interest and backstabbing in the United States during this chaotic time even caused the UNRA to abandon the relief effort there. But while that was bad, it was significantly worse in Europe. Since Asia took the biggest hit, many of the Asian population were seeking refuge in Europe. This caused Europe to be fiercely overpopulated, which caused low resources. This caused crime to increase several-fold, while an extreme amount of Europeans protested against the intake of refugees. This resistance caused the refugee effort to not come fast enough when winter rolled around, which was a lot colder than usual thanks to the lack of fuel. Many refugee shelters were not supported, and the people who were just trying to survive slowly froze to death. The ones who were barred entry didn't even stand a chance. And finally, in Russia, the Belgrade Island incident caused a political shift, as many of the Neo-Soviets rose to power and staged an uprising. They took advantage of the chaos and rallied the people to one political party. By the time the Russian Federation knew what was going on, the Neo-Soviets had already taken over and re-established communism. This caused a major and bloody civil war, and by the end of it, the Neo-Soviets came out on top. Rossartrism himself felt his own personal share of grief, as he was involved in the Japanese unrest, trying to get everyone to see the bigger picture. However, both the Japanese government and the United States military used force against him and the UNRA. Many of his colleagues were forced to flee, but Rossartrism attempted to stay behind to keep the refugees safe. This did not work out, as the refugees soon realized they had been abandoned, and they instead either made or stole weapons to fight back. When mass violence broke out, Rossartrism was forced to flee. But during this time, the Japanese self-defense force found a young girl, Kawashiki Kazusa, and it was discovered she was immune to Elid. All focus shifted towards this one girl, as Rossartrism, the defense force, and the few remaining UNRA staff members grouped together to take in Kawashiki. When Rossartrism took her in, he explained to her very clearly that she could spend the rest of her life in a lab, but she could also be the catalyst that could save the entire world. Kawashiki accepted this situation. However, rumors spread about this girl. While some saw her as a miracle that can save them, many others believed she was a monster who was somehow involved with this disease, and these people took up arms in an attempt to kill the girl. Rossartrism's final followers protected him and the girl as best they could, but unfortunately, as they were running away, Kawashiki was hit by a stray bullet. By the time they escaped Japan, she was already dead. Despite her death, Rossartrism took her into Russia for study, and it was concluded that had she survived, it was very likely she would have died anyway. After being exposed to collapse radiation, her body underwent a mutation, and in layman's terms, she would trade being able to survive off of clean air with needing to survive off of radiation. So in Kawashiki's case, the contaminated areas would have been a requirement for her. Otherwise, her body would rapidly decay. The question would be, how could they turn this into a cure? Her death would have made it impossible to figure that out. After all of this, Rossartrism felt something stir inside him. During the winter in Europe, he looked out his window and saw a young girl collapse to the ground and slowly die to the freezing weather. As he saw this unfold in real time, he finally had enough. Within him, an ideology was formed. Humanity was too far gone and deserved to suffer. So instead of trying to save mankind, they would instead prepare for when humanity destroys itself and rise from the ashes. He wrote a very long report that took years to finish, detailing his personal experience during the fallout of the Belgrade Island incident, as well as all of the wrongdoings and selfish behaviors of all the nations. He then detailed his theory that another world war was coming to fight over resources and territory, and no one would be able to stop it. Through this, he proposed that from the ashes, the survivors of humanity must come together as one global government without borders. Once this report was completed, he sent it across the world through the internet and left a final audio log stating that he believed a new humanity would rise from the approaching long nights. It was then believed that he took his own life. Through this report, the truth of this incident was provided to millions of people, and even the United Nations has shared this information among each other. Through this, a new political ideology, Rossartrism, was born. And many people around the world, including those in political power, became devout believers in this movement. Going back to the story at hand, Commander informed Kalina that it was believed that it was actually Rossartrism that reformed the United Nations after it collapsed prior to World War III, and it was rumored that it was Rossartrism who pushed for the warring nations to sign the peace treaty. If the Rossartrists had this much sway already, it could be possible that K was part of this movement. Going on that same thought, Kalina informed Commander she finally figured out why Griffin was chosen for this operation. According to an article she just found, the UN publicly declared they would embrace Rossartrism, and public support of governments that practice Rossartrism is over 70% globally. They claimed a new common destiny will be born, and mankind will soon set foot into a new era of faith and mutual aid, and that they are prepared to become the shining beacon in a brave new world. The shining beacon in a brave new world is the exact slogan for Griffin. Spreading Rossartrism is banned in Russia, so this wording fell completely under the radar. But due to this, it didn't quite click with Kalina as to why this slogan was used. But for the commander, the truth behind this was so obvious that he decided to end the conversation there and not think about it any further. Kruger is a Rossartrist, and the commander had no idea if that played into what is happening to them right now. As a side note, there is another phrase that has been used in place for this, which is the cutting edge of a newer world. Far as I know, this is a difference in translation. Shining Beacon in a Brave New World is a more localized version, while cutting edge of a newer world is closer to the direct translation, which is update the world's edge. Frankly, both are valid phrases, and the story uses them interchangeably, probably because Mika Team and the localizers couldn't keep facts straight. For the sake of consistency, I will be using Shiny Beacon in a Brave New World, because I find that phrase resonates a lot more with what the Rossartrists are trying to do. Just keep in mind that if you find either of these phrases, they're meant to be the same thing. When the next day rolled by, Griffin completed their objective. Due to their near flawless execution, Kay allowed Commander and Kalina to ask more questions. Through this, they learned that taking out the White Faction infiltrators were indeed so the bilateral meeting would remain safe. And Griffin was chosen for this task because they actually are a better pick for this than StateSec's own people. This is because Belgrade is not a neo-Soviet nation, so if StateSec does poorly, it would cause a diplomatic disaster. So StateSec required a group that is independent of them, while also having high performance. In truth, Griffin was, in fact, the best choice for this operation. However, Commander expressed concern that the operation was currently going too smoothly. In fact, the White showed extremely little skill in espionage. He was confident that this was a red herring. Kay suggested that Commander was being too paranoid, but he would relay that opinion to his client. But as for calling in StateSec reinforcements, that was completely off the table. Commander could not understand why Kay is fine with underestimating the White Faction, but his response to this was that the meeting has to happen. But the real meaning behind it is not the talks itself. What matters is the public perception behind the meeting. If everything goes well, that is fine. But if it does end in disaster, then that will be a memory that the people will not forget. Ending the conversation there, Griffin spent the next couple of days repeating this process. Kay is happy with his work and tells him to wait until further updates. Commander was still restless about this whole thing, and as he was staring at multiple feeds, he spotted something. A very familiar-looking girl was staring straight at the camera and smiled, before blending into the crowd. The commander felt a chill down his spine, realizing that was Anita. The smile she gave told him that everything Griffin has done was all according to their plan. At that point, the commander began to spiral in paranoia. Could he convince Kay with this new information? Could he prove it? What if Kay and StateSec already knew this? Or is he just imagining a threat that didn't exist? Despite these thoughts, Commander decided to keep them to himself. But before we proceed further with Griffin's story, it's time we talked about Angelia. She got a call from Kay, and he stated that StateSec agents have arrived, and Griffin passed their test. Angelia simply stated, "I told you so." But Kay replied that there would be more tests in the future. Regardless, it was time for Angelia to come into action, and Kay told her to not disappoint StateSec. She ended the call and stared at AK-12, who was staring at a memorial. She asked Angelia why the memorial had no names on it, and the answer she provided was there were too many names to carve to the stone. But thanks to that, this memorial as a whole had been forgotten to the passage of time. Angelia then explains that humans are forgetful creatures. For most people, forgetting their history gives them the courage to face the future. AK-12 found this sad, but Angelia rebuked this, stating they didn't die for her pity. They were willing to die for something they believed in, and people should put in the effort to remember the people who died for their country. AK-12 then wonders why she was so sentimental about all of this, and Angelia states she was just thinking about old friends that no longer exist. Getting off that subject, Angelia went over what they had to do, to which they had two objectives. First is to observe the quarantine wall for any foul play. Second is to operate within the city and tag any white faction members, while also looking for a pike node. AR-15 and AN-94 went into the city, and AK-12 and M4A1 stayed on observation duty. If anything goes wrong at the wall, those two are the strongest on the team. AK-12 does bring up that it took a long time for them to find an M4A1 and AR-15 when they ran off to chase Elisa, and much of that time she has not opened up about. Regardless, she silently blames herself for setting off that dirty bomb, and she was forced to fight M16. While AK-12 acknowledges she is very skilled, M4A1's state of mind is very unpredictable. Angelia answers all of this by suggesting to AK-12 to talk to M4A1, which AK-12 found a little annoying since she knew she dumped this troublesome crap on her. Regardless, she talked to M4A1 and told her she was just showing some care and concern. M4A1 did not care about this, and just wants to get the job done. But AK-12 figured she doesn't care because she's talking to herself. M4A1 denies this, but AK-12 was confident she was talking to the voice inside her head. Despite this, she let off on pressuring M4A1, as she actually found it more amusing to observe a mysterious version of her. After she leaves her alone, the voice inside M4A1 told her she hides her intentions very poorly. M4A1 tells her to be quiet, but the voice states they've been through too much together to not have built a sense of trust. M4A1 states that they have just been using each other, but the voice denies this. She has very much been giving it her all to help her ever since Operation Singularity. Regardless, the voice is happy enough that M4A1 has finally accepted her as part of her being, and she will continue to be patient. However, M4A1 states she won't forget how she lied to her. M4A1 then calls her Ogus, indicating that the voice was Ogus this entire time. M4A1 continues, stating if Ogus wants to be fully accepted, then she better serve her obediently. Ogus accepts this, as that is a mutual benefit. Then calls M4A1 her sister, and hopes they can reclaim their memories together. So for the rest of this summary, I will be splicing together events to make a linear timeline. The game does separate Team Defy and Griffin's activities, but they both interact with each other, and things won't be fully understood unless I put it in a format like this. I'm being transparent here because there are multiple scenes that are running at the exact same second. So there will be cases where I may have to double back a little bit to catch up different perspectives. This seemed like a better alternative than making an entirely different video just for Team Defy. So I ask you to bear with me on this. Starting with Team Defy, STAR-15 and AN-94 were already active in the city. AN-94, equipped with a scanner, attempted to pick up strange signals. During this search, however, she informed AR-15 that she had detected Songvis T-dolls in Belgrade. AR-15 is shocked to hear this, but considering their mission does not involve them, she decides to just keep it in mind. AR-15 then scouted a cluster of signals, which leads her to a white military base. AR-15 called Angelia, informing her of her plan to infiltrate the base and kill the white signals, which means these are white faction infiltrators. Angelia denied this though, stating it won't be their responsibility to kill them. They only need to tag them and look for the node. AR-15 questioned the reason behind this when she can do it right now, but Angelia stated she isn't part of the PMC anymore. Protecting civilians is not part of the job description. AR-15 chose to monitor the front side of the military base, while AN-94 checks the other side of the base. 94, however, got caught by a cat that crawled up her leg. She meowed it away, or tried to anyway. As she tried to talk in cat, she was approached by a mysterious girl. They had an ominous short conversation about the cat. As the girl states, while cats are cute and cuddly, they're terrifying predators. 94 felt on guard, but the pressure goes away as the girl feeds the cat, which allows 94 to leave. But as she passed by the girl, she asked 94 if she was also a cute and cuddly predator. 94 felt a chill run down her spine as she turned to the girl. But by the time she did, both the girl and the cat were gone. Feeling spooked, 94 took a scenic route to her destination. Meanwhile, Kay returned on call with the commander, and he was ready to learn more about Angelia. Kay still refused to give out this information, as she is in far too deep with her assignment and Kay wasn't willing to risk that. However, he promised that once this final and most important task is complete, he can arrange a meeting with Angelia. Griffin will now work as security detail for this bilateral meeting. While Commander initially believed this was for the Neo-Soviet ambassador, Kay threw a curveball. It was instead for the United Nations ambassador, Gilda Ulrich, a 34-year-old woman who had won the hearts of many within Europe. Before her rise to fame, she mediated many factions in Germany to lay down their arms and find peaceful solutions to their problems. She had also become chairwoman of the Cooperation Initiative Executive Committee, which has the goal of coordinating economic institutions across Europe to aid in the reconstruction plan. To do all of this at a young age of 34 is phenomenal. But this also made her an extremely high-value target for assassination. At the end of the day, she is a Rossartrist, and the idea of Neo-Soviet Russia working with a Rossartrist lackey made the public's blood boil. The Griffin army disguised themselves and positioned themselves in the summits. Commander and Kalina remained inside the building and were assigned as personal bodyguards for Ulrich. But before she could even appear, a man appeared from the sea of protesters with a bomb and dove right into the defensive line of the military police and detonated it, causing a large explosion. Almost immediately after, a truck containing the white faction surrounded the summit. Kay contacts the commander and stated to protect 3 roads leading to the building, while his own team handles the rest. During this, Kalina provided information to commander that the military restored the defensive line, but have retaliated by shooting at the protesters. The commander commented they'll be opening a peace conference with a massacre. For AR-15, 3 hours had passed before AN-94 got into position. Fortunately, nothing abnormal had popped up before then. However, 94 felt something extremely wrong. AR-15 realized there was a military jeep leaving the base, but there was no white faction signals. But 94 knew there was something extremely off about the jeep, and she chased after it. AR-15 alerted Angelia to 94's strange behavior, but Angelia reassured her that 94 has a sixth sense that is very reliable. If there was something she picked up on, it's for a reason. So Angelia ordered AR-15 to follow 94, as is likely the node they've been looking for. At the same time, AK-12 reported to Angelia that there was irregular movement happening at the quarantine wall, and they started to give off eternal signals that signified that they are part of the white faction. Angelia was disappointed in this revelation, but she nonetheless sent AK-12 and M4A1 to head to the wall and gather more information on what their plan is. when the two got there, things had already gone to hell. The rebels and the military had squared off and got into a firefight. Hearing this, Angelia ordered to break recon status and aid the military. But AK-12 wasn't quite keen on following this order, and neither was M4A1. AK-12 stated that since they are Russian weapons, using military force against humans on a foreign nation would have dire consequences. Angelia countered this by saying they can focus on the defense automatons to give the Belgradian military a stronger chance to close things out. Then Emperor A1 stated this isn't even related to the mission, as they should be looking for the pike node. Angelia then countered this by stating this rebellion is absolutely part of the White faction desire to find the pike node, and that's because there's an attack happening at the conference right now, which means this is all coordinated. Emperor A1 could see what Angelia was saying, but doesn't believe they should go off on a hunch. Angelia found this line of thinking frustrating, as Emperor A1 never waits until things are completely confirmed to act, because that leads to the consequences of inaction. She then asks why Emperor A1 is so fixated on fighting the pike node, and with some hesitation, Emperor A1 answers that she just wants to complete the mission. AK-12 does share the same opinion as Emperor A1, but at the end of the day, Angelia is their commander. So the two T-Dolls jump into action and attack the automatons controlled by the White faction. While they were in process of doing this, Angelia called again, stating the projected thunderstorm is incoming. This storm is going to intensify the collapse radiation and incite the elite that are being held at the wall. With the insurrection that is going on, it's possible that the elite could climb up the wall. AK-12 suggests to Emperor A1 it may be best to make themselves known to the Belgrade defenders so they can work together, despite this move exposing their identification. Emperor A1 thought of another way though. She found an injured soldier who was on his last legs and carried him, intending on taking him to a safe place. AK-12 had no idea what she was planning, and even stated it was unnecessarily complicated, but decided to trust Emperor A1 and let this play out. The two of them split up, with AK-12 continuing to disable the automatons. Emperor A1 carried the injured soldier inside the garrison and quickly nursed him back to health. Turns out this soldier was an officer. He thanked her for the aid and was surprised that tactical dolls looked so human nowadays. Emperor A1 told the officer that her team was sent to help the defenders, but would need the defenders to know this so they won't engage in friendly fire. The officer understood this and updated the IFF signal, which stands for Identification Friend or Foe signal, letting his comrades know that T-Dolls have entered the fray to help with the defense of the wall. The officer then begged Emperor A1 to stop the rebels, otherwise the entire city is doomed. Emperor A1 firmly told him that the rebels will not have their way. She regroups with AK-12, who overheard from the radio that she and Emperor A1 are now identified as friendlies. She then told Emperor A1 that she really doesn't need to pretend to be a cold machine, knowing that her heart is too pure for that. She won't hate her for being her true self, so she gives her permission to do as she pleases, as long as it doesn't jeopardize the mission. That way, she can observe more interesting things from her. Emperor A1 just tells her that she has terrible hobbies. As Emperor A1 and AK-12 joined the fight with the defenders, AN-94 was still following the jeep. When the jeep stopped, AN-94 stood over 3 kilometers away from it and observed. The mysterious girl from before stepped out of the jeep, and as she did, she looked directly at 94. Spooked again, 94 went into hiding, shocked that she even managed to spot her dead in the eyes from that far away. It was at this point AR-15 caught up and asked what in the world was going on. 94 then confessed that she is very certain a Neo is present, and that Neo managed to hack her neural cloud and reach level 2. Turns out 94 has a military-grade neural cloud. Neural clouds are very complex, and military-grade neural clouds are even more difficult to hack than the standard ones. So for that Neo to hack her specifications must be pretty insane. Regardless, 94 was actually very upset that she was hacked, and she wants to personally kill the Neo. AN-94 was pretty impressed by this, thinking she could be more than just an AK-12 laser. Soon after this, 94 noticed the Neo and the human entered an ancient fortress called Belgrade Fortress, a monument that has stood the test of time even during the 1600s. AR-15 was surprised that she was a history buff, but is actually AK-12 who's the history buff. AN-94 only studied this just so she could have someone to talk to. Using a directional mic, they learned this Neo was named Mercurous. AR-15 noted she's very different from the previous Neos they've taken on, and the fact that she hacked 94 just to provoke her seems off. 94 stated she doesn't have a grasp on personalities, but does believe she's more crude than AK-12. AR-15 decides to just let that one go. Following the pair, the directional mic was used again to listen in on their conversation. It was soon learned that the officer had joined the White faction in order to stop the spread of Rossartrism, as he had a poor history with them. While he and the others were struggling to survive, the United Nations were only concerned about building bigger walls. Or at least that's what he believes. Either way, he believes Rossartrism is a false ideology, and would rather it not spread in Belgrade. Mercurous does suggest that her organization is bringing a new ideology to his people as well, but the officer states they are different. Mercurous, finding this satisfactory, brings him into the fold. They continue their trek through the fortress, and Mercurous eventually brings up the reason why they're here. There is a pike node within a sealed bunker, which means a relic is housed underneath this fortress. They eventually reach the bunker. The officer stated they only had 10 minutes before they'll be spotted by security. Mercurous asks how they can unseal the pike node, and the officer states it requires a code that he doesn't have. In fact, since this area originally belonged to the Soviets, it's likely that the Belgrade government doesn't even have the codes at all. Mercurous then asks why would he bring her here if he can't even open the seal, and the officer answered, "It's to show his sincerity and willingness to cooperate." Mercurous understood this and thanked him for his sincerity. In return, she would provide him a display of confusion, anger, failure, weakness, and death. He will be the one who shows it, and she will be the one who will find joy in it. By the time the officer realized what was about to happen, black tentacles shot out from Mercurous' sleeves and impales the officer, and lifts him high above her head before dropping him already dead. Both AR-15 and AN-94 were shocked by the senselessness behind it all, but before they could process the spectacle, Mercurous had already approached them, knowing they had been following her this whole time. She was truly ecstatic for being able to deceive and kill that officer. Then she sent a tentacle towards AR-15, which was going at lightning fast speed. She managed to barely avoid it, only getting a scratch on her cheek, but that was enough for AR-15 to feel an intrusion. In her own words, it was as if something just licked her neural cloud. 94 confirmed that was the same feeling she got when she was hacked. Through that, Mercurous attained knowledge about their mission, and found it very disappointing. She straight up tells them they're entirely clueless to what is going on, and they're being deceived. Nonetheless, she became bored, and called for something called Neo-Jin. At that point, 94 detected a large mass of the White faction incoming, and AR-15 quickly called for a full retreat. Meanwhile, Griffin had dealt with the attack at the conference hall, and order was restored. Chairwoman Ulrich managed to enter the conference room and begin her speech. While things were winding down, Kalina realized Ulrich's appearance to the summit was never announced until now, and the commander surmised this was to protect Ulrich herself. But what was more alarming to Kalina was the news did not mention the battle that took place just now. Somehow, a massive explosion and blood in the streets were being swept under the rug. But the commander had other thoughts. He realized the security inside the conference room was very lacking. To him, it didn't make sense, especially with such a high-profile target. It was at that point a Griffin T-Doll recorded in. She had used the directional mic as instructed and caught some disturbing dialogue from inside the conference room. It turns out there were already infiltrators inside, and they discussed how their comrades were killed just now outside the building. Despite that, they would attempt to assassinate Ulrich. It was at this point the commander realized security had been compromised, perhaps almost entirely. But before he could take action, Ulrich completed her speech. The renegade security forces then locked down the conference room and took everyone as hostages, including the commander and Kalina. The leader of the renegade force introduced themselves as Paradis, a force dedicated to destroying the relief effort. Ulrich reasoned with them, stating she's been prepared to die ever since she devoted herself to Rossartrism. But killing her would change nothing, and people would continue to die, and homes would no longer be able to be rebuilt. But the renegade leader stated those are not their homes. He then prepares to execute her. The commander felt he was out of time and began to call in the Griffin forces to storm the conference room, even though he couldn't guarantee everyone would survive. However, Kay interrupted this command, telling him to lay low, and right after that, a gunshot went off. The renegade leader had been killed by the Neo-Soviet ambassador. As the renegade security forces got at this, the reporters inside the conference room then pulled out their weapons and opened fire. In almost an instant, all the renegade forces were killed. Commander then realized the reporters were actually undercover agents, meant to stop this very moment. The commander then looked on stage and saw the Neo-Soviet ambassador comforting the chairwoman. It was then the commander realized the big picture of this entire plan. Everything was caught on camera. Terrorists attempted to kill a well-loved leader of the United Nations, but both Russia and Belgrade worked together to protect her, and the proof was all recorded. With the bloody battle outside and the attempted assassination inside, it will make the protesters look like utter savages. It was the perfect card to play in order to further the agenda of Rossartrism. Kay applauded the commander's intuition, but what caught commander's attention even more is the name the renegade leader uttered, Paradis. Kay had already looked into this, and it turns out that it's an organization that is similar to a cult. Considering that the White Faction was also a cult, it stands to reason that Paradis is the real name, and the organization Griffin had been fighting this entire time. Commander kept this in mind, but now it was time for Kay to hold up his end of the deal and have Griffin meet up with Angelia. With a job well done, Kay finally agreed with this. At the same time as this, Emperor A1, AK-12, and the defenders had pushed back the rebel forces. They had noticed the rebels had split in half, with one half still fighting at the top of the wall, and the other half retreating to the base of the wall. This was a very non-strategic move. If they were retreating, they would want to run away from the wall, not be right next to it. AK-12 reported this to Angelia, and with some thought, she had figured out that if they were huddling at the bottom of the wall, their plan would be to open it up. She figured this was their backup plan if they did not win the battle. The rebels at the top of the wall would take control of the sector controlling the wall's control room and force it open. She ordered Emperor A1 and AK-12 to move out immediately. The two of them charged through the rebels' defensive line and got to the control room. And inside, they found a single rebel soldier pushing buttons on the console rapidly. Emperor A1 ordered him to stop and surrender, but he ignored her. AK-12 warned N4 that he's about to open the wall, and Emperor A1 ordered him again to stop. The rebels stared at Emperor A1, declaring that they cannot be stopped, and he pressed the final button. Except he didn't. Emperor A1 shot him in the head, and he collapsed immediately, finally thwarting the plan. August scorned Emperor A1 for hesitating. If she was off by even a second, she would have doomed an entire city. She says she is far too naive and she has to stop doing this. She has to understand that she can't give everyone a happy ending. Only the victors get to live on. The only way they can reach their true self is to have the strength to keep doing the right thing. This lecture is interrupted by AK-12, and she informs Emperor A1 that things aren't over yet. She makes note of the communicator that was on the dead rebel's body, and a conversation can be heard. The rebels at the bottom of the wall have realized the plan had failed. Therefore, they had no choice but to use their final measure. AK-12 and Emperor A1 immediately recognized what this meant, and Emperor A1 immediately bolted out of the control room, telling AK to distract them for as long as she could. AK-12 picked up the communicator and told them that the battle is already over and to not throw away their lives. The rebel officer on the other end of the line is surprised to hear a young woman. He then confessed that while the defenders were busy handling their fellow rebel heroes at the top of the wall, they have already rigged the bombs on the weakest point of the wall, and all he needs to do now is press a button. AK-12 asks why he's doing this. Why doom the civilians he swore to protect? Could he and his rebel friends truly look at the badges they wear if they let the elites swarm the city? He responded with a yes. What they're doing is for the sake of peace and freedom. They did not give a damn about the people inside the wall. Real people are the ones outside, who are struggling to live every single day. The ones who live in the green zone do not care about those that struggle, so let them and the people in charge bear the consequences of their actions. AK-12 was at her wit's end, now screaming that if they do this, they will also die from the explosion. But the rebel officer simply said this is a battlefield. They are ready to die. She then screams they're just madmen, and the officer agreed, laughing into the communicator. AK-12 then communicated with Emperor A1 that the rebels have gone completely insane, and Emperor A1 said she was almost at a point where she could take a shot, but it was too late. The detonator was pressed, and after that, all Angelia could see was a massive series of explosions that towered the entire area. This same explosion could be felt at the conference hall. Commander and Kalina saw the explosion from where they were, and the Griffin T-Dolls immediately reported this, with RO chiming in, stating that their defensive line had come under fire by Paradus, and they are on an entirely different league than what they've been dealing with before. They've already lost half of their forces and needed to retreat. At the same time, Kay shared with the commander that his field teams have nearly all been wiped out by an ambush. If that wasn't enough, a T-Doll scout team reported that elites broke into the city and are just outright slaughtering civilians indiscriminately. It was deduced that the massive explosion was in fact the quarantine wall being breached. The commander begins issuing orders, but before he could even finish, massive armor-piercing shells tore through the walls of the conference room, and one of them hit the Neo-Soviet ambassador and tore him completely in half, with the torso slamming into Chairwoman Ulrich and knocking her out. The undercover agents were torn apart soon after from snipers. No amount of cover would protect them from rounds meant for armored vehicles. The commander got deep to the ground while keeping Kalina close, and informed Kay of the massive slaughtering of his own men. Kay already knew this, however, as he just witnessed the same type of slaughter of his own teams that were meant to reinforce. He deduced that Paradus somehow got in the ranks of Belgrade's government and planted a mole that leaked the details of their plan. Everything before this moment was just to make everyone believe they had everything figured out. And during that time of false security, the mole gave Paradus the positions of all the teams in place. The commander stated this level of intensity could not just be for the chairwoman, and Kay doesn't deny this. It's very likely that Angelia is also in trouble, as he just lost contact with her. But at this point, Kay was out of immediate options. It would be on the commander to stop the slaughter and get Chairwoman Ulrich out of there. Kay gives commander full authority to do whatever it takes to get the situation under control. The commander quickly ordered the Griffin T-Dolls to clear the enemies around the building with the heavy artillery that Javier provided, and the dolls that were inside the building managed to get him, Kalina, and the chairwoman down to the basement to avoid sniper fire. The T-Dolls then cleared the streets while Kay's agents went on a suicide mission to clear out the snipers so the chairwoman could escape. Once outside the building, the chairwoman woke up. Commander explained the situation to her and stated that they were the last of her security detail. He assigned RO to be her personal bodyguard so the commander could fully focus on coordinating with the other teams. She is to be taken to the safe house that Kay set up as a final backup plan. On the way there, RO and her squad are confronted by a very different looking Neo. She calls herself Neo-Jin, and after a short moment of gloating, she orders her forces to fire upon everyone, not caring if the Chairwoman died as well. To make matters worse, the elite were also flanking them, and the Commandant's forces were busy trying to cut through everything. Despite the immediate danger they were in, the thing that was grating RO the most was Neo-Jin's psychotic laughter. The only thing RO could think of is to use herself and the squad as a distraction and hopefully break away from their bad situation. Back at the wall, M4A1 and AK-12 reported that the wall has been breached and the damage is large enough that emergency repairs wouldn't be viable. On the intercom, an officer named Lieutenant Drakovich called for the rest of his men to stand up and continue defending the wall. M4A1 recognized his voice as the officer she saved before, so she makes a suggestion to leverage the trust she gained with them to combine forces. Angelia agreed with this, and after being patched to Drakovich's frequency, they collaborated. Turns out Drakovich and the rest of the defenders were just young guys with very little combat experience, so despite doing their best, he, as a leader, wasn't sure how to best coordinate this defense. Angelia patched his weakness by giving him the best possible solutions, telling him the best thing he can do is stay alive so they can continue defending the city. During this time, Angelia watched from afar as the elite swarmed into the city, and she could hear the screams of terror. She felt a bellow of rage build inside her, and she sent a call to Kay, demanding for answers, suggesting that Kay lied to her about the situation being fully under control. Kay replied to her hostile suggestion, saying it's impossible, even for StateSec, to sniff out every single traitor. Some things are just inevitable. Begrudgingly accepting this, Angelia requested for more troops to support the wall, but Kay can't do that since they're all dead. There were no more in reserves. Frustrated at StateSec underestimating the situation, she informed she'll be recalling her team and head over to support the conference hall. But Kay informs her that the Neo-Soviet ambassador is already dead, so she shouldn't even bother. She needs to stop concerning herself with things outside of her sole objective, which is to find the pike node. Angelia then states that Kay seems to have an entirely inhuman response to all of this, as if there's a secret agenda that StateSec has on their priority list. Kay states she is overthinking it, and to just do her job. She is a terrorist, and is at the bottom of the barrel. He doesn't care about the crazy shit she pulled before, and right now, he is the only one who can evaluate her and put her back in the good graces of StateSec. With that, Kay reaffirms to shut up and do her job. Angelia, put off by her hands being tied, ends her transmission. Despite the frustration of her commander, AK-12 chimed in to state that Kay has a point. Since this actually isn't their objective, they're free to leave at any time. But Angelia holds fast to the idea that letting the defense crumble would only decimate their chances of finding the pike node. So all they can do right now is buy time for AR-15 and 94. At first, Angelia was thankful that at least the rebels were only able to create one hole in the wall. But as soon as she thought that, another bomb went off, and another hole was created. AK-12 guesses that rebels set a timer on another set of bombs, and timed it so emergency repairs on the first one wouldn't matter. Regardless, defense of the wall was all but useless now. They don't have the manpower to cover both, even with the added help of the garrison troops. Speaking of them, they were slowly getting flanked thanks to the new hole that has been created. Angelia called in to Lieutenant Drakovich, telling him to order an evacuation and that her T-dolls will cover them. But Drakovich refused. If they left now, it means more elites will storm the city, and more people will be killed. Every elite they kill could delay more deaths. Angelia states that only matters if they stay alive to keep defending, but Drakovich's conviction is absolute, and so are his subordinates. Instead, he states they will cover the T-Doll's exit, and will continue to protect their families until the very end. He then thanks Angelia for helping him get this far, Angelia, knowing she can't reason away that sort of resolve, accepted this and ordered Team Defy to retreat, and she silently wonders if it's a good thing that the nation trains soldiers to give up their lives senselessly. Back inside the city, RO was still distracting Neo-Jin, but this turned out for the worse. She was hunted down, and Neo-Jin extended a tentacle, catching RO by wrapping it around her legs, and then she proceeded to lift her 2 stories high and then smashed her to the ground. Neo-Jin then slammed her foot against her and declared her to be an unsatisfying piece of junk before she moves to kill her. Just then, Neo-Jin gets blown back by an RPG as Softbot entered the fray and went into CQC with Neo-Jin, which he found a lot more enticing. RO took this opportunity to get the Chairwoman out of this hellish situation. Fortunately, the commander managed to coordinate the teams and clear out the road leading to the cathedral. But that would only be temporary. RO calls for Softmod, and she disengages from Neo-Jin. However, Neo-Jin wrapped a tentacle around Softmod's neck, attempting to decapitate her. Softmod retaliated by breaking the tentacle apart, grabbing it, pulling Neo-Jin towards her, and lets out a powerful kick that sends her flying, and then firing another RPG at her direction. Landing on his target, Neo-Jin exploded. With RO lightly commenting on how Softmod likes to show off, they all ran into the cathedral. Once inside the cathedral, everyone managed to take a breather, but that only lasted for a moment as Paradis began attacking it. Fortunately, the building was sturdy enough to hold for a while. Ideally, getting in contact with K and setting up an evac plan would be their best scenario. But Kalina was having a hard time getting in contact due to all the chaos. The network was entirely in disarray, and their radio was all they had left after they had to abandon most of their equipment. But even if they did make contact, it would take time for reinforcements to come. Time they may not have. And that's with the belief that K had the ability to deliver in the first place. Failing that, they would need to make a run for it and break through Paradis forces with the Chairwoman. But it was quickly reported that surviving civilians, which included children, had also came to the cathedral for shelter. This made matters far worse. They couldn't possibly bring the civilians for that type of plan. They would either die trying to escape or cause the Griffin T-Dolls to die trying to protect them. Commander grimly understood what had to be done. Kalina caught onto this train of thought and began to panic, telling him to not think about abandoning the civilians and wait for her to fix the radio. But it's not like the commander wanted to do that. It was a grim reality he had to face. It was at this point, Chairwoman Ulrich spoke to the commander. She felt the stress he was under while overhearing the conversation. She first asked where he was from, and he simply stated he was just a part of a struggling PMC group. She then told him she felt she was no one important, and she doesn't even believe she's even worth protecting. She has always been ready to die once she took up the beliefs of Rossartrism. The world she is trying to build is for everyone else, regardless of where their loyalties lie. The people are innocent and did not deserve to die from war. She believed the commander had a very kind heart, so she asked him to either stand and protect the civilians or give her a gun and let her stay when they choose to abandon the cathedral. Too many people have been killed thinking she was someone important enough to die for, and she would rather stay true to herself than to leave these people behind. The commander looked into her eyes and knew she was not lying. She genuinely had the conviction as a Rossartress. He told her he does not agree that the world would come together and under one banner, but he wouldn't abandon her, nor the civilians. The Chairwoman thanked him, stating she knows she practically pushed him into a corner, but she knows he's a good person, and he should keep using his power for justice. That way, the world would become a better place. The commander was starting to understand that this is what it means to be a shining beacon in a brave new world. The commander altered his orders. Instead of abandoning the cathedral, they would make it the last bastion. He ordered all T-Dolls to break through the forces and save nearby civilians and bring them into the cathedral, and told Kalina to keep trying to get through the K. Back at the wall, Emperor A1 was trying to reason with the garrison troops to leave and not throw their lives away. But nothing worked. As Drakovich said, the results were absolute. even though Emperor A1 could clearly see a lot of them were trembling and fearing their coming deaths. She couldn't bear to see this, but she wasn't willing to leave just yet either. She called Angelia and let her know she had an idea. She told her she's going to use the explosives from the deceased garrison troops and detonate the top of the wall, and the debris should be able to plug in the first hole. Angelia immediately denies this, stating that's way too dangerous, but M4A1 didn't care and set off. But before she could move, she felt her chest get burning hot and her ears rang painfully. She could feel her neurocloud boil like it was going to melt down. She then screamed to August why is she stopping her, and August bluntly states she is too important and what she is doing is too dangerous. She is surprised Emperor A1's heart is so moved by these soldiers, but there's still a purpose she needs to complete. After regaining control, she hears Angelia telling her to calm down. Despite her good intentions, the wall has taken a lot of damage, and it's very likely setting off another high-impact explosion could make the entire wall collapse, which would make Drakovich and his men's deaths be entirely in vain. After listening to this, Emperor A1 just felt helpless. But Angelia reassured her that they'll get their time and make it all worth it. AK-12 then interrupts his heart-to-heart by stating AR-15 has contacted them, and they seem to be in big trouble. Jumping to AR-15 and AN-94, they managed to escape the clutches of Mercurous and traveled endlessly underground. This led them back to the surface, where they entered a building that looked like a theater. But once they emerged there, they were met by Mercurous, who had somehow beat them to the end of the tunnel. Turns out the tunnel system they went through is actually a labyrinth she was already familiar with, meaning their retreat was a lost cause in the first place. Furthermore, this trap was well prepared, as the area was signal jammed. AR-15 and AN-94 prepared themselves, now forced to fight Mercurous and her forces. During the battle, the two were slowly being overwhelmed. With the area jammed, they were forced to fight on senses alone. When it seemed that their deaths were all but inevitable, the theater suddenly blacked out entirely, and AR-15 heard a very familiar voice. The theater was then restored of power as M16 was spotted on the balcony, along with a league of Sangha's forces and the ringleaders. M16 gives the order to attack, and the SF ringleaders began their assault on Paradis. 94 realized SF disabled the jammers in the area, so AR-15 immediately got in contact with Angelia to update their situation. Angelia is absolutely shocked to learn that SF is in the area, but AR-15 states that whoever wins this battle is going to mop the floor with them next. Angelia understood the situation and told her to hang tight, and informed Emperor A1 that she needs to leave the wall to support AR-15. Emperor A1 complied and retreated from the wall. AK-12 sensed Angelia's frustration and asked her if she was okay. Angelia is, perhaps surprisingly, dejected that she had to once again go against Emperor A1's wishes to save others, and then wondered if they even had the power to save themselves. Since AK-12 left far sooner than Emperor A1, she was rushing to catch up. She, however, ran into a heavily injured soldier, and beside him was a pile of elid corpses. Against good judgment, Emperor A1 took the soldier to a shelter to keep him safe. As she's about to leave, the soldier stopped her and asked to kill him. He had been infected, and he could feel himself beginning to turn. He would rather die knowing he proudly defended his home than to become a monster. Emperor A1 accepted this, and the soldier saluted her before she pulled the trigger. August was proud of her for doing the right thing, but Emperor A1 rebukes this, just stating she didn't have a choice. She then questioned how any of their sacrifices changed anything, and that if she could sacrifice herself to restore peace, she'd gladly do it. But that isn't the reality they lived in. August tells her those soldiers felt the same way, and through them, she now knows sacrificing herself for a cause would not change the world. Emperor A1 then asks, why is the pike nose so important to her? And August answers, it contains a power that is rightfully Emperor A1's. If anyone else gets it, it could spell disaster. While Emperor A1 doesn't even want the right to any power, August affirms that everyone is burdened with some calling in their life, but her calling is special. is a destiny that could save far more people than the many that have died today. August understands that Emperor A1 is suffering, but it's up to her to find that joy through that suffering. Emperor A1 wonders why August makes it sound like that she has no choice but to suffer in the first place. But then August states, they share the same confusion, they share the same pain, and they share the same demise. Everything she has told her is an effort to help her rise above from all of that. Emperor A1 then smiled bitterly and accepted that August has been telling the truth. She now understands she is woefully underpowered and can't protect anyone, and this is why she has to rely on others, even August, to see this through to the end. But before she accepts her destiny, she will complete this mission for Angelia. Back at the theater, the battle was just raging on, as AR-15 and 94 observed from their hiding spots. AR-15 was surprised to see that all Osangas had become significantly stronger, as they were tearing apart the white faction. There was even a new ringleader next to M16 who was coordinating all the attacks. Mercurous, seeing this battle go beyond her control, decided to retreat and leave AR-15 and 94 to SF. M16 chased after her, but then AR-15 proceeded to fire at M16, but the new ringleader got in the way and deflected the bullets with just her arm. 94 wondered why AR-15 fired at M16, but it was easy to tell that AR-15 acted out of anger at that very moment. The new ringleader called to slaughter AR-15 and 94, but M16 stopped her. It was clear now that M16 was the leader of this assault team, and the new ringleader, called Beak, was her second in command. M16 orders AR-15 and 94 to drop their weapons and surrender. If they did not, she won't hesitate to reduce them to a pile of scrap metal. With no cards left to play, the two of them complied. M16 then ordered them to take them to the pike node. AR-15 states she may not remember the way, but then M16 points her gun at 94 and tells her she will remember. At the cathedral, Griffin had managed to save many civilians, and miraculously, their defense of the cathedral has held up. Kalina finally managed to get through to K, and Commander immediately called for reinforcements to evacuate them. K states the city is way too hot for an evac chopper to land in the city, so the extraction point has to be outside Belgrade, and the commander will have to take the Chairwoman Ulrich out there. The commander shuts this down, stating they have civilians that need to be saved, and the Chairwoman will not leave unless they are rescued. K didn't give a damn about that, and told Commander to knock her out if he had to, but that was shut down once again. Commander then stated that since K was in a safe zone, that means he has some sort of workforce. So if K wants the Chairwoman evacuated, then he will also need to evacuate the civilians. Therefore, Commander demands reinforcements right now, no negotiations. After a long pause, K agreed, but told Commander that he will regret forcing his hand like this. The Commander replied that if he makes it out alive, he'll gladly accept those consequences. 5 minutes later, K arrives with trucks, barreling through the E-lid. However, the trucks are not armored, and as it stands, they were already damaged. That was the best K could do given the situation. Kalina outright states the civilians would be better off just staying in the cathedral, which K agreed with. Their best course of action would be to take the Chairwoman out with an escort, and the rest of Griffin can stay to protect the civilians as they have been doing. This seemed like a terrible idea at first, but RO actually agreed with this, stating that Paradis is after the Chairwoman Ulrich, so leaving with her would draw at least a partial amount of their forces away, making the defense of the cathedral more manageable. Commander expressed concern for the escort itself, but RO states if they do nothing, they'll slowly be overwhelmed anyway. Accepting that this is their best shot, Commander agreed to carry out the plan. RO, Softmod, and a squad of elite T-Dolls formed as the Chairwoman's escort and took off. Unfortunately, this plan did not work out too well. While on the road, a civilian car was hysterically driving on the road and almost crashed into the truck that RO, Softmod, and the Chairwoman was in. This forced the truck to swerve out of the way, and as a result, it crashed headfirst into a railing. The truck had been totaled. Griffin surrounded the truck while the chairwoman stayed inside and fought an onslaught of Paradus and Elids. During this, Neo-Jin reappeared, shocking both RO and Softmod. Neo-Jin stated she wants to kill Softmod for what she did, but the chairwoman came first. She threw a smoke grenade into the truck and dived in. RO and Softmod rushed back to the truck, and by the time they got there, both Neo-Jin and the chairwoman were already gone. They then spotted Neo-Jin on a rooftop carrying an unconscious chairwoman and ran off. RO and Softmod called the squad to make chase as fast as they could. After several minutes of chasing, they reached an abandoned building. Inside is a chairwoman tied to a single chair. Fortunately, she is alive, but there is no Neo-Jin. The chairwoman apologized to RO and explained that although Paradus has done so much to capture her, Neo-Jin suddenly stated that the chairwoman had just become worthless. She then left her behind, stating she will have to deal with the whatever isms and the calamity it will bring. When the chairwoman asked what that meant, Neo-Jin just replied by asking why she still hasn't noticed yet. Ultimately, the chairwoman doesn't understand what she was talking about, but she was certain that in that short span of time, Paradus accomplished something very important. RO couldn't wrap her head around it either, but regardless, it was time to take her to the extraction point. The chairwoman ended their conversation by saying people like RO and the commander could make the world a better place, and she pleaded her to stop whatever Paradus is planning. RO accepted this, as she's all for being a shining beacon in a brave new world. Meanwhile, Emperor A1 caught up with AK-12, and together they reached the ruined Opera House. Before Emperor A1 stepped in, AK-12 stopped her, confident it was a trap, and suggested they should search the perimeter for any other way in. During this time, Emperor A1 couldn't help but ask if AK-12 was worried about her longtime partner, 94. AK-12 answered she is worried, but it's not nearly as much as Emperor A1 is worried about AR-15, who has pretty much told her that Emperor A1 was a good-for-nothing in battle. Furthermore, since AK-12 is not an emotional wreck like those two, she was confident that 94 could handle herself and AR-15's antics despite the odds. Emperor A1 did admit, despite being on the same team for so long, she didn't really know AR-15 very well. AK-12 then suggested that she should take up a hobby and become the second member of her observation fan club, and Emperor A1 had no idea if she was joking or not, to which AK-12 found fascinating. Before she went deeper into that rabbit hole, they picked up a broadcast on the open network that citizens are to make their way to the cathedral to be sheltered by a defensive force, and AK-12 figures that this was the commander's doing. Emperor A1 agreed, knowing his kind heart. But thanks to that broadcast, AK-12 now knows for a fact that this was a trap, as even though there is chatter on the emergency broadcast trying to coordinate the rescue, there are no signals entering the Opera House, which means the area is jammed. At the end, they both agreed the best option right now is to blast through the front door, ready for a tough fight. Bursting in, they are immediately attacked by ringleaders Executioner and Hunter, along with an army of SF mooks. The ringleaders were to separate the two, and then fully assault them. Emperor A1 engaged in combat with their old enemy Executioner, using the large metal weapon case on her back to block her melee attacks. Despite all the upgrades to the mooks, the only one who stood a chance against Emperor A1 is the ringleader herself. Regardless, Emperor A1 realized they were being significantly delayed. Ogas then lightly chimed in, telling her that the pathway to the pike node is in the theater, and points out the door. Ogas then tells her that she needs to move fast and avoid battling SF. As for Paradus, Ogas can handle them, no matter the size of their forces. And before Emperor A1 could start the protest, she tells her to trust in AK-12's ability to handle herself. Accepting this, Emperor A1 calls out the AK-12 and enacts their plan. SF continues to keep them apart, while both ran to one side of the theater. SF gave chase, but once the two were out of the blast zone, AK-12 detonated the bombs they rigged, the explosion large enough to take out half the Opera House, and the SF forces that were cluelessly shooting from there. Both ringleaders took heavy damage, with Executioner getting flung onto the stage. Before she could understand what was going on, Emperor A1 had opened her weapon case and it transformed into a pulse particle cannon. With a deafening boom, the particle blast hit Executioner and reduced her to ashes, along with the stage itself. Emperor A1 then ran to the door and let AK-12 handle the rest. Hunter cursed the Griffin T-Dolls, but AK-12 simply stated that she is not from Griffin. And just like with our partner, she will pay the price for her ignorance. Far from the battle above them, AR-15 and AN-94 were still being held hostage by the rest of the SF forces, led by M16 and Beak. AR-15 asked M16 why is she working for SF, and M16 simply responded she wondered the same thing about AR-15, since she switched sides first. But before the conversation could go deeper, they are interrupted by a Paradox attack. AR-15 suggested that she and 94 be given weapons to fight with, and to Beak's surprise, M16 agreed. Beak started to think M16 was drunk, but she reasoned that since the two are leading the way, it's overall more efficient if they can fight their way to the node. Of course, this also meant SF would not have to go out of the way to protect them, and if the two think about betraying them, Paradox wins. With all those reasons combined, Beak begrudgingly understood and went along with this. 94 asked AR-15 what was her plan, but she didn't have one right now. She's just looking for any advantage they could get. They engaged with the Paradox forces and quickly broke through. Yet they weren't strong enough to handle the Paradox forces when surrounded. This is where Beak came in with her motorcycle, easily thrashing them and turning them into roadkill. Beak found it amusing some of the strongest T-Dolls IOP had to offer can't even mop the floor with the fodder of Paradox, and she proceeds to easily destroy them without breaking a sweat. As AR-15 watched this, she felt the urge to ask if Beak was even a Songbus T-Doll. Her specs were just way too different from the standard design. 94 followed this up by suggesting she could be an entirely new model. While Beak was very annoyed by the questions, she assured them that she is a Songbus T-Doll, and SF has many tricks up their sleeve, but she won't tell them anything more. Minutes later, Beak continued to thrash the Paradox forces, but it eventually got to the point where the other SF forces were being overrun, and it eventually led to Beak squaring off against a league of Paradox dolls herself, which she was more than happy to handle. But before she could, AR-15 and 94 backed her up, and the three of them took out the forces. Beak was impressed they were so willing to team up, and she began to hold a different opinion of them. But then she wondered how they both got behind her if they were leading the way. And her answer came when she felt her neural cloud get hacked and overloaded, causing her body to lose most function as she slumped off her motorcycle. Taking this opportunity, AR-15 and 94 made a run forward, while Beak fired blindly in their direction. Once out of the distance, Beak regained control of herself and became extremely infuriated. M16 showed up after this, telling her to calm down, but Beak complained that she let them go, knowing if she had kept up with her, they would have had no chance to escape. But M16 reminded her that their mission is the Pike node, not them, and regardless of how it ended, they have indeed arrived at the node. So at the end of the day, it's Beak's fault that she got careless. Considering Beak is her supervisor, maybe it's M16 who should be the one supervising her. Beak, having enough of her 4D chess, just lets it go. She accepts her next orders from M16 and rides off to handle it, while M16 takes the rest of the forces and marches on to the Pike node. A fair distance away from this, Emperor A1 traversed the labyrinth, avoiding the SF forces. Paradox, however, was a different problem, since Emperor A1 lacked familiarity with their design. However, August had a plan. She explained that the Nidos are not unlike her and Emperor A1. While the lesser dolls of the White faction can be hacked by standard components, it'd be difficult to do against the Nidos since they lack machinery, giving Emperor A1 the hint that Nidos are actually human, or at least as close to human as they could be. Despite this, August has a feeling that she, as an entity, could hack into the Nidos. The only thing Emperor A1 has to do is find one and get rid of the protection they're wearing on their heads, as that seems to be acting as a firewall. If August can hack one, she can get all of the lesser Paradox dolls to stand down, while also learning more about the Nidos themselves. Everyone agreed with the plan, but before she could proceed, she runs into AR-15 and 94. AR-15 explained the situation while 94 slumped over, having been shot by Beak during their escape. Emperor 1 explained that the Nidos can be hacked as long as the headgear was destroyed. But AR-15 found a wrench in that plan, stating there are now 2 Nidos. So if one goes down, the other will just take command. August then relays to Emperor A1 that they should hack both of them at the same time. While this appeared near impossible, AR-15 trusted Emperor A1 knew what she was doing, and agreed to help. 94 also agreed to stay behind, considering her condition. Back towards the Pike node, its entrance was ferociously blocked by the remaining Paradox forces. Both Mercurous and Neo-Jin were commanding the force, and their combined coordination unleashed constant and rapid firepower on the SF forces. Getting close was impossible. M16 began to recognize that their positions made them hopelessly outmatched, and she had decided it was time for her to step in to turn the tides. But before she could, 2 bullets whooshed past her and broke the protective headgear on the Nidos. August then hacked into both of them. The battle suddenly paused on both sides, as for a moment, both Nidos stood there like statues. Suddenly, Neo-Jin howled out in pain, screaming that it hurts and begging for her father to help her. She then hysterically ran off, screaming to don't come in. The Paradox dolls then similarly began to make a clumsy retreat, dropping their weapons. SF then began to rain fire upon them, as M4A1 and AR-15 slipped past the chaos. AR-15 rightfully asked how the hell M4A1 just did that, which she covered up by saying she just learned a few new tricks. In reality, she had no idea what August did or is currently doing. But AR-15 bought the story easily and is overall just impressed that M4A1 suddenly became a lot more reliable. Still, there was one more Nido left, Mercurous. AR-15 thought her brain was destroyed by how lifeless she looked, but upon closer inspection, she just looked scared stiff. As AR-15 got closer, Mercurous suddenly asked for her sister, wondering where she went. It also seemed she had forgotten her name, as she said her name was Nido, but was promised a new name if she completed a mission for her father. Despite AR-15 aiming her weapon at the Nido, she ignored it, perhaps out of sheer panic of not knowing where her sister was. She then spotted M4A1, and suddenly became a lot more relieved and happy. She called M4A1 her sister, and was glad she was safe. She began to run to her, but then gunshots rang out and pierced the Nido. Unable to make it to the one she called her sister, she just maintained her smile and fell over, dead. M16 then stepped forward, looking dead straight to M4A1. M4A1 had one simple question. Why did she just kill her? M16 explained she needed to be killed, and M4A1's kindness wouldn't have allowed it. She then tells her that she's getting in way too deep, and to stop listening to the voice inside her head. She recognized the power she just used, and that power is something that M4A1 should not be wielding. M4A1 finally sees that M16 is not under Sangla's control, which M16 confirms. She's fully aware of what she is doing, but she can't come back to Griffin, since that's what the voice would want. The bottom line is, M16 can't allow M4A1 to take the Pike node, so she either backs down or fights. M4A1 and AR-15 easily chose the latter option, but before it began, Beak came crashing into the area with her motorbike. M4A1 and AR-15 were forced to dive out of the way, and by the time they got their bearings, M16, Beak, and the Pike node was gone. M4A1, determined to get that Pike node, immediately gave chase, with AR-15 determined to back her up. After contacting the AK-12, she confirmed that M16 and Beak barreled through the exit of the Opera House. She managed to find some operational motorbikes herself and told them to hurry. Meanwhile, RO, Softpod, and their team managed to get the Chairwoman to the evac chopper. Establishing contact with Kalina, she tells them that Paradox suddenly stopped attacking so they managed to break through and get the civilians out of the city. While this would mean their mission is complete, Kay gave a new assignment to the commander. Griffin has to return to the city and fortify its defenses. This is for the sake of reinforcing Angelia's team. Furthermore, M16 and SF were discovered in the area. With those revelations, RO and Softmod immediately rushed back to Belgrade. Within the city, M16 and Beak were making a clean getaway with the node, but they had quickly been stopped by a Griffin blockade, with T-Dolls ready to fire. Team Defy then rode into the scene with their own motorbikes and reinforced Griffin. M4A1 begged M16 to stop, but M16 was just about done showing mercy, getting ready to show her hand. But then SF reinforcements came in led by Judge, breaking the blockade. Telling M16 to follow her orders properly, she engaged in combat. M16 and Beak took the opportunity to drive past the chaos. The Griffin T-Dolls told Defy to give chase while they hold off Judge. The commander, seeing this unfold from his temporary command post, was left with a lot of questions. Softmod already knew that M16 was a songless T-Doll, but she asked the commander that if it came down to it, will he kill M16? To that, the commander clearly states no. She means too much to Softmod and also too much to himself. And it was just as important that they figure out the truth behind all of this. Griffin and Team Defy worked together to surround Beak and M16, but Beak's motorbike was extremely agile. It avoided many of the barricades that were set up, and M16 gave Beak permission to use everything in her arsenal, and Beak excitedly followed through, blowing up much of the area to slow down Team Defy. M4A1 sped up her bike, attempting to get closer, and Beak unleashed a full salvo of missiles at her. Team Defy provided cover fire, but there were too many missiles. M4A1 swerved past most of them, but one was clearly going towards her. M16 then aimed just right, a bullet jabbing the missile and barely knocking it off course. That same missile, however, crashed close to the rest of Team Defy, and a shockwave knocked them all off their bikes. AR-15 told M4A1 to keep going and they would catch up, and M4A1 followed through on that request, still giving chase. While no one else noticed, Beak totally realized that missile absolutely should have hit, and nothing short of a miracle should have allowed her to dodge that. She then states M16 was definitely going easy on them, as her accuracy was complete shit. To which M16 states her driving was complete shit. Beak did not believe this for a second, but before the accusation could go further, they realized they had to deal with one last barricade. But this barricade was held down by RO and Softmod. Softmod launched an RPG at the bike and it got flung off it. But Beak managed to drop a smoke grenade to quickly make an escape on foot. Carrying the pike node, they managed to make it out of the city, but Emperor A1 and Griffin quickly surrounded the both of them, with Team Defy quickly reinforcing. Beak called in SF to abandon all other directives and rally at their location, and stop Griffin at all cost. A massive battle ensued with M16 and Beak in the middle of it, and M16 realized they were severely running out of options. That's when she heard a voice in her head, a voice she did not want to hear again. The voice told her that if things kept going the way they are now, she'll have to stop holding back. Knowing she doesn't want that, she gives her an offer. Connect to the pike node, and the voice will help her. M16 initially refused, but she saw that the commander's forces and the AR team were holding nothing back to reach her, and it made her realize she truly does not have the will to fight to the last man standing. The voice promises that both sides will come out relatively unscathed, as long as she complies. So M16 agrees. She leaves the commands to Beak while she hooked herself to the pike node. The voice makes a note that M16's creator seems to have made a perfect plug for the relic, before a painful amount of data floods into M16. It was so painful that she collapsed, but she managed to not black out. The voice then states that all the data has been drained, and the node means nothing now and can be left there. She also states partial access of the data has been given to M16, just enough to satisfy SF. She then orders M16 to retreat, as she will now hold her end of the bargain. Suddenly, M4A1 senses a powerful interference that blows through the entire battlefield, and all dolls except Emperor A1 herself collapses. Emperor A1 calls out to the AR team asking what happened, but all RO could say is they couldn't move before comms were jammed. August tells her it's taking everything she has to shield Emperor A1 from the interference. Emperor A1 realizes no Sangha's T-Doll is capable of doing this, but August disagrees. Emperor A1 then hears a motorbike come to life, as she sees M16 and Beak ride out of the battlefield. Once they were gone, the interference was gone, and all the T-Dolls came back to life, wondering what the hell just happened. SF also reactivated, and retreated soon after. RO came on comms to state to not give chase, and instead prepare for attacks from elids that were still swarming the city. Emperor A1 asked August if they actually won, since she wasn't able to stop M16. Regardless of if they truly won or not, she was starting to accept the truth. August can make her powerful enough to keep the ones she loves safe, and perhaps if she can do that, M16 will come back home. August simply replies that she hopes she does come back, but first, she should reunite with those loved ones. On the battlefield, Emperor A1 and AR-15 were grouped, and together, they reached RO and Softmaw's location. Softmaw cried her heart out, holding onto both of her long-lost friends, and RO just smiled, relieved that the worst is over. For the first time in a long time, Emperor A1 was able to smile. Now, all that was left was bringing back M16. When night fell, M16 and Beak reached Agent and transferred the data to her. Agent congratulated her for a job well done. M16 asked for an audience with Elisa, but Agent denies this, as she is too busy rebuilding SF. But when her efforts are complete, she will allow it. After being ordered to rest, M16 leaves to be alone. Beak doesn't trust M16 at all, and Agent agrees with that feeling. But right now, M16 is one of the most powerful members of SF, and they need that. But beyond that, Elisa is relying on M16's connection with M4A1 to achieve her objective. Until then, SF will make good use of her abilities. After reuniting with the commander, the Griffin T-Dolls and the reformed AR team built a temporary camp, taking the Pike node with them and guarding it. The T-Dolls were very happy to have M4A1 and AR-15 back with them. At the camp, M4A1 approached two T-Dolls who were guarding the Pike node, and stated she'll guard the node, and for the two of them to get some rest after a hellish day. Accepting this gracious offer, they left her to it. With instruction from August, Emperor A1 hooked herself to the Pike node and downloaded its data. As she does, Emperor A1 felt like she had been sucked into a black hole. Within, she saw many shards of memories. The ones that stood out were several coordinates on a world map, a relic site being excavated, space itself, a satellite in space, the core of the satellite, and a blinking signal. August states that these are pieces of her own past, and through this, she had realized that these Pike nodes are a part of her. The coordinates in this memory are where the remaining nodes are, but she can't get much more than that, since this particular node had already been drained. August then asks Emperor A1 to help her, as she does also see tiny bits of Emperor A1's past as well. More importantly, if August learns more about herself, then she will be able to make Emperor A1 more powerful. While Emperor A1 didn't like the idea of this, August knows this is what she wants to do as well. She has already accepted that she is unique, and she can only have a future if she learns about her past. During this time, AK-12 and 94 and Angelia had regrouped and debriefed. Angelia had accepted that Emperor A1 and AR-15 have returned to Griffin, but found it very weird that SF left the node behind after all that trouble. Furthermore, AR-15 and M4A1 hadn't told the commander the pike node needs to be destroyed, so she decides to get in touch to make that happen. But before she could, Kay calls Angelia, telling her that there's been a change of plans. StateSec will be taking the pike node. Angelia refused to go along with this, saying she doesn't have to listen to him anymore. But Kay has already ordered the commander to guard the pike node so it can be taken in. So she could only destroy the node if she is willing to duke it out with the commander. And even if the commander decides to comply with Angelia, the temporary camp they're holding is sanctioned by StateSec. Meaning if they disobey orders, StateSec will have their heads. Once again, seeing that her hands are tied, Angelia accepts the situation, but she silently swears she won't be under Kay's thumb for much longer. That is all for part 2. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.